Hello everybody, and welcome back to another Compass Box Studio video. Today we're going to be hopefully exploring something that might help some of you. Some of you might even school me in terms of how I did it. But we put out a poll a couple of days ago asking you guys what you want to see the most, and the majority of you asked about how to start a studio. Now, whether that entails like the finances associated to it, the gear you should buy, maybe, little tips and tricks as to what you should think about before you start a studio. We've also covered bits and pieces of this in two of the podcasts that I've done with two other studio owners. You've got to go check that out. I've done one with JJ from Island City Studios in Mumbai, which is arguably the best indie studio in India right now. He's got some of the tastiest gear I've seen in a studio in India. I mean, they do amazing work, so you got to go check that out. And I've also done one with Ryan from Creative Sound Lab. He's got almost 60,000, 70,000 subscribers. He does amazing tutorials about, what should an audio engineer do at a studio, different ways of experimenting with drum techniques and miking techniques. So you got to go check that one out as well. That being said, I realized that, we haven't really done like a genesis story of Compass Box Studio, when it started, why it started. We covered a little bit of that during our Compass Box Crew podcast, which you should also check out. But we haven't really gone into the details of what it means to start a studio. So in order to do this like breakdown video, I'd like to define this video into 4 different parts. One is the purpose. So what is the purpose of your studio? One is cost. How much budget do you have for it? One is gear, which directly links back to purpose, but you'll see why I've put it as a separate point. And the last one is vibe, which I think is also super important, that both JJ and I have discussed at length at his podcast. Let's start with the first point, which is purpose. And this will define the cost, range, size, gear, even vibe as well of your studio. The first thing I think you should probably think about is, what is its purpose? So back when I started Compass Box in 2018, the initial idea of creating the space was mainly to be a jam room where me and my friends can come play, track a few songs, mainly practice. The scope of recording something hadn't really occurred to me until much later. And if we were playing something really cool, then to have a really primitive recording setup in place so that we could track our ideas as we go. Fast forward a few months and I realized that, if I'm spending so much time and money creating this space, might as well get some good recording gear as well, so that if in case we wanted to record an EP or an album or a single. By the way, I had no idea at the time of what it meant to produce a song yet, because I had never done that before. I didn't study that in college. So the thought of creating a space to record music professionally was very daunting to me, because I didn't come from a background of music technology. When I went to college, I studied education, integrated educational studies, and I minored in classical guitar performance. I had a brief stint over there where I was working as an audio engineer, but it was mainly for classical recording. So all I really had to do is put a mic and just hit record. There was no post-processing involved. There was no layering or anything. So my experience in recording was very, very limited at the time. So as the purpose grew from a jam space to a recording studio, the next thing I needed to figure out, as far as the purpose is concerned, is how many people do I want to record over here? I know there are terms like, bedroom producer and bedroom recording studio floating around, but that's still a set purpose. That's a defined purpose for a lot of people. After I had taken the plunge of creating a studio, the next step was to figure out, okay, I want to be able to record live bands over here. I want to be able to record live drums and guitars and vocals and basses and, multiple instruments playing together live in this space. So as far as the treatment of the room is concerned, it's not super dead. I want to keep it. The room is not huge. I know the room looks pretty big in the live sessions in the videos that we do, but it's not a particularly large studio. But I wanted to make sure that we kept the sound of the room super live, because that was the purpose that I had set out with. If you're mainly going to be working with programming stuff and, at most recording vocals, you don't need a space this big, and you definitely don't need 16 or 24 XLRs running through your studio for multi-track recording, because you're mainly going to be recording either vocals or acoustic guitar at most. That'll be overkill. So if your purpose is to, DI guitar, vocals, arrangement and production, you can do that very comfortably in your bedroom. With a little bit of acoustic treatment, you can make sure that it sounds good from a mixing perspective or a mastering perspective. You don't need a live room per se if you're not going to be recording live instruments. Let's go to the second point briefly, which is, costing and budget and finances. I'll put it blatantly, and JJ and I have also talked about this, but it's an expensive proposition to start a studio like this, especially if it's going to be a commercial studio in any capacity. If you're going to be hiring out your studio to other people for them to record, it's an expensive proposition. There are much better ways, I'm sure, of spending that money than building a studio. And as much as you can do it from a DIY perspective, I would recommend that. Of course, if you have the money to get experts to come in, treat your room, do the measurements, find out the modes and the diffusion of your room, go for it. But when I was doing this, I pretty much did this entirely DIY. I didn't call a sound expert to come in to I didn't call an audio expert to come in to do the measurements of the room and get measurement mics and figuring out where the dead spots are or where resonance is happening the most, what's room tone. None of that. I just did it based on what I saw online, and I built it as my proficiency of audio technology and engineering was going up. Be aware that your cost is also going to be compounded by the fact that if the purpose of your studio is to rent it out commercially and record live instruments, then you probably have to buy that equipment as well. Most studios, bedroom studios, for example, you're not going to find a tube guitar amp and a bass amp and a drum kit. You're not going to find that kind of gear there because that's not the purpose. Speaking of which, let's go quickly to number 3, which is the gear that you're going to be using. As you can see, I've got like a couple of tube amps. There's a drum kit right behind me. There are 2 tube amps over there. There's a Mesa Boogie over there. I have a lot of gear in the studio, and that's happened over a course of 2 to 3 years. It's not that I started off with all of this equipment. For a long time, the primary interface at the studio was a Focusrite Sapphire Pro 40, which is an old Firewire based interface, 8 channels, and it has served us so well. The first 3 records I produced was done entirely on that gear, and I had an Octapre Mark II extension to go with it. So at my studio, I've got 16 channels of multi-track available to me. So I can record live drums with vocals, with guitars, with bass, with synths if need be, because I wanted to have that live recording vibe. And if you know our channel, then you will know that we specialize in that. We specialize in that one-take live recordings when we call different indie artists to my studio over here and we produce a song for them. Now, most people will say that, if you've got a Focusrite Sapphire Pro or like a Scarlett 8920, it's not really a professional studio. You can't really make good music with that. Well, we're a testament against that. I don't think gear should be a reason why you should feel you're not capable of doing something, because the gear is definitely not the bottleneck when it comes to production. It's definitely not the limiting factor when it comes to the quality of your audio recordings either. Heck, with that gear, we got nominated for Best Pop Production Tag at the Production Music Awards in London. So I don't think you should worry too much about, I need to get an Antelope audio, I need to get Lynx, ADDAs, or I need to get the Universal Audio Apollo or Symphony Apogee. You don't need to worry about that. Whatever gear you have is good enough to start a studio. And anybody who tells you otherwise, saying that, okay, if you are starting a studio, you have to get this interface. No, don't listen to those people. You can do amazing music with surprisingly cheap gear, because that's just how technology works. 20 years ago, that would have been a different story. But today, audio technology has gotten so good that even entry-level interfaces are absolutely satisfactory for, studio quality and release-ready singles and EPs, etc. So we had an Octapre Mark II and a Focusrite Sapphire Pro 40 as our main pre's. 16 channels of Focusrite pre's. If you look at our very first live sessions, the drum mics you'll see on those will be Samson mics. And, they sound pretty decent. I think the whole idea of spending a lot of money to get the best mics in the world and stuff is, of course, a pursuit. It's a goal that you should definitely go for when you're building up your studio. But to think that you need all of that to start off with, and to think that without that, you cannot make great music is a fallacy. I had a couple of Samson drum mics, 57s. I had one good condenser that I bought used, which was the Blueberry. Then slowly built up the arsenal, got a ribbon mic, got the Rode NTR, and then got a tube mic after that. But all of this happened in phases. It's like the MCU, phase 1, you don't even know at phase 1 of the MCU, like what phase 3 is going to look like. But you know that you're creating the building blocks right from phase 1. And that's the important part, that even if you're building a budget studio, make the building blocks right. And the building blocks is acoustic treatment. If you're recording acoustic instruments like drum kit or guitars, get the best that you can afford within that particular price bracket. With preamps and ADDS, you'll be absolutely fine with something like a Focusrite 8920. And if you really want to upgrade your pre's, then you can definitely look at the Audient ASP 800 and 880s. Those are amazing ADAT expanders for existing interfaces. So you could buy a small interface like an Audient ID14 Mark II, which has an ADAT in. So you've got two inputs to start off with, and then you'll have flexibility and expansion later on. Let's talk about the fourth part, which is the vibe. And I mean, you guys have seen the studio, and hopefully it's a studio that it looks like it's inviting, that you want to come here and spend more time. Lighting is typically a often disregarded aspect of studio building. You want to make sure that not only is it well lit, just because it's better to have a well lit space than not, but you have to make sure that it looks inviting for an artist to come in. If you're going to be working with a lot of musicians like I do, I want this to be a space that looks inviting, that is not clinical. And I'm so fortunate that every artist that I've worked with has gone away with that experience with that in mind. I have a bunch of LED lights as well for different colors. I've got lights on a track over here when we're shooting videos. That's something you can also consider as far as your purpose is concerned if you want to shoot video in your space. If I know that I'm going to be going into a space, especially a studio, and spending a lot of hours tracking a part, I want to make sure that it should be a place where you feel it doesn't fatigue you. And that's such an important part that the vibe delivers. So get your equipment, get your costing, get your space right, but make sure you have a vibe in mind. And in my studio's case, as you can see, the vibe is fairly chill. We're musicians ourselves. The entire Compass Box crew, we're all musicians. So we spend a lot of time in the studio, which is why I wanted the studio to feel that you can spend a lot of time without being fatigued by it. Now, I'd like to share some just really simple tips and tricks when it comes to building the studio. As far as acoustic treatment is concerned, you can absolutely make them yourself. Get rock wool in the exact standard and density you want, build frames around it, and you're good to go. There are plenty of places that also sell, existing acoustic panel and treatment. Avoid those cheap foam panels as much as you can. As far as I know, in my experience over here, they do almost nothing. Those really plushy acoustic foam panels that you can sort of stick on your wall and stuff, they might be good for like removing some of your sort of high frequency, especially if it's a square space, is that it's going to be your lows. It's going to be bass traps and fundamental frequencies that are, below 200 hertz. Those are going to be your problem frequencies, which these acoustic panels are not going to do anything about. So if you're thinking about spending a lot of money getting these soft acoustic panels and filling up your space, don't do that. That's a waste of money. Rockwool comes in many densities as well, so you can pick the one that works with your budget. Now, as far as wiring is concerned, I've had, two conversations with two different people about which way is the right way. In my experience, get the cheapest good wiring you can. And what I mean by that is that, you don't need to get like Mogami cables for your whole space, because that's going to cost a fortune. And what I mean by that is that you can get Mogami cables for, all your studio wiring and stuff. But you don't need to. You can get by with cheaper brands. But notice I'm saying cheaper brands in quotes. There are some, wiring brands, and, especially when it comes to the connectors, like get decent connectors. Get Nutric connectors are really good. Get MX as well. MX is fairly cheap. Most people would not recommend them, but I've never had a big issue with them. Some of the extra wires that I had, I used for creating, patch cables. I used MX connectors, and they've been going strong for the last 3 years with no problem. Now, when it comes to the other kind of gear to use, as far as drum kit is concerned, amps are concerned, if you have the budget for it, get a good tube amp. As far as guitarists are concerned, now whether or not it makes a big difference if you have a solid state amp versus a tube amp, just get a tube amp, because people are more likely to look at your studio a little more professionally that way. It sucks, I'm being honest about this, but there are some incredible solid state amps that will also do the trick. The Katana is a great example of it. I know Fender has one, which is their, what's it called? Tone series, Tone Deluxe. It's their solid state version of a twin. Roland has some of the most incredible solid state amps out there. So don't feel like you have to get a tube amp. If you have the budget, like I said, it really helps. It does have a little je ne sais quoi about it. But you can get away absolutely fine with a good solid state amp as well. For a drum kit, you can build up to it again. You don't need to get like, a DW collector's kit right off the bat and sort of be done with it. Behind over here, we have a DW Designer Series. We've been using a Tama Superstar Hyperdrive for a long time, which is my friend Shivang's drum kit, which he's very graciously lent to the studio for the longest time. Cymbals, for the most part, drummers will be getting them. So if budget is an issue, don't buy cymbals, because most drummers will have cymbals that they'll be getting anyways. Another little tip / trick is that, so all the wiring that I have at the studio currently go under the floor. So I've raised the floor by about 3.5, 4 inches. And in hindsight, that may not have been the best strategy. I did it because it looks super clean. All the XLR cabling is like put across the edge of the studio. So, when we shoot a video, the studio is not cluttered with wires going everywhere. But that being said, I know maintaining that is going to be an issue, so that if, let's say, a cable fails or need to replace something, I'll have to open up the floor in order to do that. But it does look clean, which is my purpose anyways. So I hope you guys enjoyed some of the, stuff that I've learned, at least running and opening the studio. Of course, this is just the how to start a studio part. If you guys are interested and want to see more about how to get clients, how to learn your engineering, and how to build a studio into a brand, because, fortunately, we've been putting out a lot of work over the last 3 years, and we've been on, Rolling Stone magazine, and we've been with the top 10 studios in India for indie musicians. And please comment down below if you had a different opinion than what I said. There are so many people that I've spoken to about close friends of mine who have said that, okay, you should not have done that, or you should not have done that. You should have bought this instead of that. And, I'm sure there are going to be different opinions about this, but this is just what I've learned over the last 3 years. And please subscribe, like the video if you found it informative. And like I said, please comment down below if you want to see more videos like this.